Greetings, M squared here, and today we're going to talk about the slope-intercept form of a linear equation. So we have two goals: to be able to write equations and to be able to graph equations. So we're going to graph equations if they're in slope-intercept form, but we're also going to write equations. When you write equations, they could give you different information. They can give you a slope and a point, they can give you 2 points, they can give you a slope and an intercept. So we're going to figure out how to write it no matter what they give us. But regardless, in slope-intercept form, the word slope and intercept are there because in order to write in this form, you need a slope and an intercept. M represents the slope, which is kind of weird. I don't know why. Slope doesn't start with M, but M represents slope, and B, again, B stands for the y-intercept. So you need to know that. But it's important to notice that y is alone. This equation is solved for y. The x and y will always be an x and y in this form. It'll always be a variable. The m and the b will change depending on what the slope and the y-intercept are. So really important that you know y is alone. Some people get confused when it's written in a different form and they just look in front of x to find m. But you can only find the slope in front of x if y is by itself. So that's super, super important. So right here, our little first example, y is alone. So we look in front of the x, that's called the coefficient of the linear term. This is the coefficient, and it says what is the slope? It's the number in front of x. Notice there's a separate x and m in the formula. X is not the slope. It is not part of the slope. X just tells us where to find the slope. So our slope is -1/2. Our y-intercept then is what comes after it, either added or subtracted. Now I say after. I could have also written this like this. That's not in slope-intercept form because slope-intercept form has the y equals and then the mx and then the b. So it's not the correct form, but this is the y-intercept. It doesn't matter if it's before or after it. You can tell it's the y-intercept because there's no x with it. Okay, so the y-intercept is -5. So just a couple quick examples of equations, and then you need to find out the slope and the y-intercept. Okay. Is y alone? That's the first thing you ask yourself. Yes, y is alone. So the number in front of the x, the coefficient on the x, is the slope, and the number added or subtracted after it is the y-intercept. Notice I use the minus sign. That -7 tells me it's a -7. Is y alone? Yes. What's the x? Oh, there's no x. Well, then what's the slope? Well, the only thing that would get rid of an x is a plus 0x, because 0 times x is 0, and 0 plus 17 is 17. If it was a 1, 1 times x is x. If it was a 2, 2 times x is 2x. So the only thing that would prevent us from having an x is if the slope was 0. So if y is alone, my slope is 0 if there's no x. The y-intercept then is what was added to the 0x, so that's a 17. If I had an x equals line, like an x equals 5, that can be kind of considered standard form, slope-intercept form. Y is not alone. But notice the absence of y tells you there's no y-intercept. And the slope is not 1, and we'll talk about that later. This is actually a vertical line, and this is a horizontal line. So vertical lines don't have a slope, and vertical lines also don't have a y-intercept. So that's an exception, and I didn't put an example there, so I thought I'd just throw that in. Y equals -1/4 x. Notice there's no y-intercept. Well, the only thing I could add to that to keep it -1/4 x would be a 0. So the number in front of the x, when y is alone, is my slope, and then the number added or subtracted is my y-intercept. So my y-intercept is 0. Slope, because y is alone. Always check to see if y is alone. Y-intercept. Okay. So now we're going to talk about graphing a line that's in slope-intercept form. And you do that different than the other forms. So each form has its own method of graphing. So here are the steps. We're going to graph the y-intercept. Then we're going to start at that point, the y-intercept, and use our slope to find 2 more points. And then you just want to be aware of vertical and horizontal lines, which I mentioned up there. So that means they only have a y, right? Horizontal lines only have a y, vertical lines only have an x. So remember from our previous day, our slope, if it's positive slope, it's going to be up and right, or down and left. And if it's a negative slope, it's going to be up and left, or down and right. One of them has to be negative. So here we go. -9. So we're going to go down to -9. That's our y-intercept. Then our slope is up and left because it's negative. So that means up 3, left 1, up 3, left 1. And we connect our dots. And that is our first line. And now we're going to graph this one. Our y-intercept, we'll do this one in a different color. Our y-intercept is 2, so we're going to go up 2. And then our slope is positive 1/2. That means I go up 1, right 2, up 1, right 2. And notice I could have gone down and left as well, which we talked about, but that is that line. And then we will graph the next line. So the y-intercept is -4. I'll do this one in that color. You might not be able to tell the difference between those two. 2, 3, 4. Our y-intercept is -4, so we go down 4, and our slope is positive 2/3, so we would go up 2 and then over 3 before we make our next dot. And those are the 3 lines and how you graph them. So remember those steps. First, graph your y-intercept. Start at the y-intercept to find 2 more points using the slope, and then connect your dots. If they don't give it to you in slope-intercept form, then all you have to do is get y alone to get it in slope-intercept form. All right, so that's the graphing part. And now we need to write equations. So we're going to first write them from graphs, and then we're going to write them from points. So the first thing we would do is we would look at the graph, and we notice we have to have a slope-intercept, a slope and an intercept. So here we go. We have the y-intercept of 1. So there's a 1. And we have a slope of down 1, right 2. So down 1, right 2. So we find our slope and our y-intercept, and we have our equation because we put the slope in front of the x, and we put our y-intercept afterwards. All right, here we go. Find our slope and then our y-intercept. Y-intercept is 3, so that's a +3. Our slope is down 1. Well, maybe it's not. I think it goes right there. So we're going to go down 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, over 5. So if we go down and left, that's a negative, so it ends up being a positive. So we have a 2/5. And you've got to kind of see where it crosses the grid and use that. So again, slope, y-intercept. Okay, our y-intercept is 0 because it crosses at 0. So we don't really need to put a +0, but I'll just put it here so we can see that. And then we need to find where it crosses the grid points. Looks like right there. So then we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. We went down 4 and right 1. So then our slope is -4. So we know our equation is -4x. You don't need the +0. Okay, again, find the y-intercept. Looks like 3. Then we go down 1 over 1, down 1 over 1. So if we're going down and left, that's a positive slope because the same as going up and right. So our slope is 1, so we just say y equals x plus 3. Notice I didn't put a 1 in front of the x. It's okay if you do. You can put a y equals 1x plus 3, but you won't see it that way very often. You'll never see it that way in a book. Some kids like to do it just because it reminds them that the slope is 1. So either way, but you won't see it like that in a book because it's not considered simplified. Okay, now for the most challenging, I think, of all, is to write an equation if you just are given 2 points. So we don't have a slope. That means first we have to find our slope, and then I'll show you how to find the y-intercept. And then we're ready to write our equation, right? Because we need a slope, and we need a y-intercept. So a slope, remember, is y minus y over x minus x. So I'm going to put our little y minus y over x minus x. I'm going to put our y's here. So I'm going to put our 4 and a -1, our -6, and our 9. You could have started with this point too, but I just went like that. So what is 4 minus a -1? A minus a negative gets me a positive. And what is -6 minus 9? -15. So my slope is a -1/3. Okay, halfway there. So this is what I do. So I choose one of the points. Let me choose this one. So I'm going to choose the one that has an x of 9 and a y of -1. And then I already know my slope is -1/3. And I'm going to take my equation, my y equals mx plus b, my slope-intercept form, and I'm going to plug in what I know. I know that y is -1. So I'm going to change the y. I'm going to substitute it. It's called substitution. Take the y out, put the -1 in. then I know that my slope is negative 1/3, and I know my x is 9. I don't know my b. That's the thing I'm trying to find. Remember, that's why I'm doing this, to try to find b, because I have my slope. All I need is my y-intercept. So now I simplify. Negative 1/3 times 9 is negative 3. So to get b alone, remember, I'm trying to find b. I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and I found out that b is 2. Once I find out that b is 2, I'm ready to write my equation. So my equation is y equals mx plus b. And that is how you find b. It's a little bit of substitution, a little bit of order of operations you got to remember, but that's how you do it. Let's try another one. Okay? So again, we need our m and we need our b. So we're going to use our little slope formula, right? Y minus y over x minus x. So we're going to say 4 minus 2. That's our, that's our y. And negative x negative 3 minus 2. So y minus y, x minus x. So 4 minus 2 is 2. Negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5. So our slope is negative 2/5. And now we are going to find our y-intercept. So we take our equation of our y equals mx plus b. Let's pick 2, 2. Because then it doesn't matter which one we put in for x and y. They're both the same. We're going to say y equals negative 2/5. That's our slope. This is our x. Remember, we're taking our x and our y, and we're plugging it in. And then we got a plus b. Now this one's not going to be pretty because 2 does not go into 5, or 5 doesn't go into 2. So it's not going to reduce. So we're just going to have a little fraction there, but that's okay. We can deal with fractions. So this is a negative 5/4, but I still need to get b alone, so I have to add 4/5. Sorry. I have to add 4/5 to both sides. And when I do, I get 2 and 4/5, but I really want to change this to fifths because I want to be able to have an improper fraction. It's usually, I like to do it that way. You could say b is equal to 2 and 4/5. That's an acceptable answer. I like to have improper fractions just because I know I can do any operation with improper fractions quite easily. So I know that b is either 2 and 4/5 or 14/5. Remember, to change it to an improper fraction, it's 5 times 2. 10 plus 4 is 14. Or here we just changed it to 10/5, and then we got 14/5 because we added the numerators and the denominator stayed the same. So now we're ready to write our equation because we have our slope and our y-intercept. So we have y equals negative 2/5 x, because our slope was 2/5, plus 14/5. And that might not look pretty to you, but that's how you do it. Okay, good luck with slope-intercept form. M squared, signing out.